Well, unfortunately, it happened. I, Henry, Christopher, and Dictor, aka Hank, have finished last in the review and preview Quick Picks Challenge. And because I finished last on the season, I have been tasked to do a punishment that will be very, very painful for yours truly. And this punishment has two parts. Both of these punishments will be something that I absolutely dread. And without further ado, let's get to part one. And may I present to you the slide for one of the worst losses in Yankee history. Now, when looking at this series, this pains me for so many reasons. Forget the fact that my beloved New York Yankees had lost to the Boston Red Sox. It wasn't even that happened that bothers me. It was the way the Yankees lost. And in doing so, they pulled a reverse sweep. And for all the amazing tradition and history that there is in Yankee history, unfortunately, this is that one defeat that will just never go away. So now, with all my rambling aside, let's talk about what happened in that series. But first, for context, we must discuss games 1 and 3. 1 through 3 rather. Yankees took game 1 10-7. They jumped out to an early 8-0 lead. Bernie and Matsui hit a barrage of RBI doubles and singles. Both of those players, by the way, were some of the more redeeming factors in the Yankee lineup, even over the course of the last 4 games. And the other thing that was memorable about game 1 of that series, Mike Mussina threw a perfect game, was throwing a perfect game through 6 innings, did not allow a single base runner. It wasn't until the 7th that he ran into trouble. He gave up 5 runs. Boston started a crazy rally. Jason Varitek hit a 2-run home run in the 8th inning. They made it 8-7, but the Yankees would get a couple more runs. I believe it was Matsui that drove in the insurance runs. He would have been the most valuable player had the Yankees won the series, but we'll get to that later. The Yankees ended up winning this game 10-7, but that this game definitely set the tone. And I can only imagine if Curt Schilling was pitching this game healthier, maybe we wouldn't even be talking about the historic comic. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Game 2, John Lieber, who pretty much is a forgotten Yankee pitcher. He pitched mostly in the National League. He spent some time with Chicago Cubs and the Philadelphia Phillies, to name a few. But in 2004, he was a semi-decent Yankee pitcher, not one that everyone really talks about anymore. He pitched 7 innings, allowed 1 run in this game, and thanks to a home run by John Olerud, another Yankee who isn't really remembered, but his name's going to be important later on. He hit the home run, 2-run home run off Pedro Martinez, and Pedro actually pitched pretty solid in that game, other than that home run. But he couldn't get a lot of run support. The Yankees actually won this game, and this is probably the only game in the series where the Red Sox bats didn't really come out swinging. So, big 2-0 lead for the Yankees, taking both games in the Bronx, and things are looking pretty good. We go to game 3 of the series, and this is the game where there was a little bit, despite the fact the Yankees won in a blowout manner, this was the first red flag of the series. Kevin Brown starts this game. He doesn't give up a run in the first inning. Then he allows 4 in the second, and he gets pulled after that inning ends. And essentially, the Yankees won this game in spite of their pitching. Kevin Brown as I mentioned, gave up 4. Javi Vasquez was average in long relief, but definitely better than what would happen in his next start. And the Yankees would win. The fact that the Yankees won this game in a blowout, the score of this game was really eerie. Now, as everyone who knows their baseball history knows, the last Red Sox title before they went 86 years without winning one was 1918. And in this game, somehow the Yankees won 19-8. And with that win, the Yankees would go up 3-0. And they had a chance to extend the so-called curse of the Bambino for another year. And the historic part about this game, and again, as I'll get to for the next 4 games, the part that's forgotten about it Hideki Matsui, 5 hits and 6 at-bats with 5 RBIs, 2 home runs. A historic performance that unfortunately has gotten one-upped and is forgotten in Yankee history. Gary Sheffield, 4 for 5 with a 3-run home run. That was probably his last hurrah of the series. Bernie Williams, who you could always count on for a clutch hit, had 3 RBIs, and so did A-Rod, who actually hit a home run in this game. So everything looked great for the Yankees. They had the stranglehold, and it looked like and after a crazy 7-game series win in 2003, it looked like another year where the Yankees would continue their 85-year dominance over the hated Boston Red Sox. So now we get to Game 4. As I mentioned, the Yankees are up 3-0. Only need one more win to clinch their 40th American League pennant. They would lead this game 4-3 in the 9th inning. El Duque actually started this game. He was one of the few Yankees that was left from the championship teams of the late 90s. He gave up 3 runs, but the Yankees were winning because A-Rod hit a 2-run home run, and they also would get RBI singles by future leader of the Major League Baseball Players Association, Tony Clark, and Bernie Williams, who, again, as I mentioned, was always someone you could count on for a clutch hit. So now we go to the 9th inning. Mariano comes on, and anyone with the brain who was watching this game had to think the Yankees got this. There's no way they can lose. What can possibly go wrong? Well, I'll tell you the first thing. Walking Kevin Millar to open the inning. If there's one thing I have learned in many of my years as a baseball fan, whenever a relief pitcher, or any pitcher for that matter, walks the leadoff batter to start the inning, that is never a good sign. Because oftentimes that batter can be someone who is very good at getting on base, and oftentimes it leads to a run scoring, whether it be on a single, next batter hitting a home run. You get the point. So Kevin Millar leads off the inning. He walks. Now, it should be noted that Kevin Millar was one of those hitters that had a good average against Mariano Rivera historically. I believe it was somewhere around the 350 mark. So it's possible that maybe Mariano was being a little too careful, trying not to give Millar the pitch to hit. And Kevin Millar, by the way, had a memorable line before this game, actually. Right before, as everyone was taking batting practice, he was running around the field shouting words of encouragement, saying, "Don't let us win one. Don't let us win one." And as I'll get to later, I'll explain why he said that. But anyways, back to this game. He's on first base. And as he described in the famous documentary, 4 Nights in October, which, by the way, regardless of what team you support, I strongly recommend watching that series. He gets pinch run for Dave Roberts. Rivera, trying to keep him honest, makes numerous pickoff throws at first base, but looking back, that probably helped Dave Roberts because it gave him the adrenaline rush. It gave him the good amount of time to get ready. So on the next pitch Mariano Rivera throws, Dave Roberts steals second. And if you watch the replay of the stolen base, that was one of the best throws that Jorge Posada could have made in that situation. And you look at the picture of Derek Jeter applying the tag on Dave Roberts, he came pretty close to getting him out, but unfortunately, it wasn't quite meant to be. And so the Yankees end up and are now in trouble. You have a runner on second. That's the tying run. Bill Miller's up, and it's also worth noting that Bill Miller had good numbers against Mariano Rivera. His career batting average was .455. Included in those numbers, rewind back to July 24th, 2004. The Yankees are up 10-9. Bill Miller comes up with a runner on base, hits a walk-off home run against Mariano Rivera. Now, if you're familiar with that date I mentioned, you'll remember that was the day that Jason Varitek and A-Rod had that infamous bench-clearing brawl, and many Red Sox fans and players who remember that season will tell you that was the turning point for them. But back to this game, Millar once again comes up with a clutch hit. He gets a big single up the middle. Dave Roberts easily scores the tying run, and although the Red Sox would get although Miller would be in scoring position later on, the Red Sox didn't end up winning the game in that inning, but the game would go into extras. And after a scoreless 10th inning, the Yankees had an opportunity in the 11th. They had the bases loaded, but they could not come up with the game-winning run. And you'll notice this is a pattern here with regards to the Yankees over the next 2 games. So then we get to the Red Sox, bottom of the 12th inning. Manny Ramirez walks. Big Papi steps onto the plate. Well, I should say now Hall of Famer Big Papi, as he is, as of this recording, he has just officially been inducted in the Hall of Fame. He hits a home run off Mariano Rivera. This was the game that essentially birthed Big Papi as one of the most clutch hitters in Red Sox history. And unfortunately for the Yankees, they failed to sweep, but they need not worry. Although the Red Sox can enjoy this celebration, the Yankees still have 3 more chances to put them away and go to their 40th World Series. Can it happen in Game 5? Well, unfortunately, this more so than Game 4 is the game that I have the hardest time watching. And this is the one where I think everything changed. And you'll see by what I described the game, the context as to why I have the silly Billy Madison meme and why I have the silly Drake and Josh meme on the bottom right corner. So let's fast forward to the top of the 6th. Yankees are down 2-1. Another guy you can count on for a clutch hit with 2 outs. Looks like Pedro's trying to get out of a jam. Derek Jeter slaps an RBI double with the bases loaded. Everybody scores. Yankees take the 4-2 lead. And then 2 batters later, the bases are loaded again. Hideki Matsui's up. Now, remember, I said that Hideki Matsui had by far the best performance out of all the Yankees. He had that 5-hit game in Game 3. In total, he had 14 hits and 10 RBIs in this series. So there's no doubt he would have won the MVP award had the Yankees, well, spoiler alert, had the Yankees finished off and won the series. But in this at-bat, he would hit a line drive that probably 9 out of every 10 times would have dropped down on the ground for a hit. But Trot Nixon, who ironically misjudged a Derek Jeter fly ball the year before in the infamous Grady Little game, this time was in the right place at the right time, and he made a sliding catch that pretty much prevented the Yankees from blowing the game wide open right then and there. So can't really fault Matsui. It was a hard line drive that he hit, but that's just bad luck. Baseball is a game of inches. So, and it's not a stretch to say that if that ball dropped for a hit, at least 2 runners would score, and chances are the Red Sox are probably finished. But unfortunately, this wouldn't be a punishment video if I were talking about a Yankees victory here, now would it? So let's go to the 8th inning. 2 innings later. The Yankees survived an ordeal in the 7th where they had a run. Red Sox had a few runners on base. Manny Ramirez hits into a double play. Miguel Cairo leads off the inning. Hits a double pretty much off the monster. Jeter hits a sacrifice bunt and sends him to third base. So now you have A-Rod up. And remember, this was A-Rod's first year. This was at the time when A-Rod didn't have as much controversy following him around as he would in later years. But by that point, he was the big name superstar that the Yankees acquired, and he was already looked at that point as arguably the best player in Major League Baseball. So runner on third base, A-Rod's up. You'd probably expect him to get a hit at this point, right? Well, A-Rod, you had one job. All you had to do was hit a ball out of the infield or even a ground out, but nope, he struck out. And from there on out and over the next few years, I look at that at bat as the start of what would become A-Rod's reputation as an absolute choker in the playoffs. So A-Rod strikes out. Mike Timlin walks another batter, but then he gets replaced by Folk, who gets out of the inning. Yankees don't score. They're still up 4-2, but could be more. And then let's put it this way. Those runs would come back to haunt them. Because then Tom Gordon comes in to pitch, and Tom Gordon was probably one of the shakier bullpen pitchers the Yankees had that whole postseason. He gives up a home run to Big Papi. Now it's 4-3. And all of a sudden, you could see the writing on the wall. Kevin Millar, the guy who crowed, "Don't let us win one," he falls with a walk. And it's deja vu all over again. Because guess who comes in and replaces him as a pinch runner? Dave Roberts. He doesn't steal this time, but he goes to third on a Trot Nixon single. Mariano would replace Tom Gordon immediately after this. Tom Gordon didn't even give him out in this inning, in other words. But, Mariano gets another blown save. However, this time it's not necessarily his fault, because the run that the Red Sox would tie the game, but it was on a sacrifice fly, and Mariano got all three batters out in this inning. However, with that said, it was still a tie game, but the Yankees still had a chance to win this game. We go to the ninth inning, and this is where the next few innings are where some of the more critical missed opportunities happen. Ruben Sierra walks. Tony Clark hits a ball that looks like it's going to head over that short little right field fence at Fenway, but it hits the ground, has a little bounce, but then instead of bouncing back onto the field, it bounces into the stands. And I don't know whether Ruben Sierra would have necessarily scored had the ball not been a ground rule double and reached the seats. But in any event, it was a case of bad luck because they didn't get that extra run that they could have used. The next batter popped out, and after a few innings, not much scoring, the Yankees almost got another gift. And this is kind of one of the more forgotten innings of this game. Jason Verrett, Tim Wakefield had to come on in relief because by this point, Boston had used up pretty much most of their bullpen, and I think they pretty much needed Tim Wakefield to save them, give them the few innings. So Gary Sheffield gets on base because of the drop third strike. Now, keep in mind, whenever Tim Wakefield would pitch, he would usually have Doug Mirabelli as his personal catcher because Jason Varitek would often have trouble handling his knuckleball. And that was the case when Gary Sheffield got on first. And then not only would he walk a few batters, but Gary Sheffield would end up going to third because of multiple pass balls by Jason Varitek. But you would think the Yankees would have been able to take advantage of this. But again, if I'm talking about a Yankees series as a result of review and preview punishment, what do you think happens? Not only do they not get a hit, but they do not score the go-ahead run. And it is yet another runner in scoring position fail. And finally, in the 14th inning, with Johnny Damon on second, Big Papi hits a line drive into center field. Damon scores, and in the words of Joe Buck, he can keep on running to New York. And as Yankee fans felt that night, even though they were still up in the series, I think you could safely say they felt the same way as Spider-Man did. Pain. But with a little comfort in knowing that the last two games were going to be played at the house that Ruth built, where tradition lives. So surely the Yankees had to close this series out, right? Well, this game, the bloody sock game. I mentioned in game one that Curt Schilling had got hit hard and probably was the reason that the Red Sox fell down 1-0 in the series. And the reason he didn't pitch as well, he was pitching that game with a torn tendon. And he had already aggravated when pitching in the 2004 American League Division Series against the Los Angeles Angels from Anaheim. So with Schilling not being at 100%, the Red Sox decide to get creative and have him take a risky procedure. And that involved suturing his ankle. And as a result of this, with his ankle being fully sutured, he was fully available to pitch despite not necessarily being at 100%. And because of what happened to his ankle, you'll notice in that picture, that's why there was blood literally pouring out of his sock. And credit to Curt Schilling. This was one of the gutsiest pitching performances in postseason history. He went 7 innings. He only gave up 1 run in the 7th. That was a Bernie Williams solo home run. But by the time Bernie Williams hit that home run, it was already 4-0 Red Sox. They jumped out to a 4-0 lead. I believe it was the 3rd or 4th inning. Jason Varitek hit an RBI single. Mark Bellhorn hit a 3-run home run that was pretty much headed over the fence. It hit a fan's jacket and then bounced back off the field. But the umpires got together and correctly ruled that it was a home run. So, and even though the Red Sox didn't score, the Yankees just had so much trouble hitting Curt Schilling. So, Curt Schilling probably would have been invincible, though, right? Well, there is one thing that really hasn't been taken into account. Why didn't the Yankees bunt? Curt Schilling was pitching that game, and he would have been hobbling around the field trying to field a bunt. If the Yankees had been resourceful enough, you would think Joe Torre probably would have told his guys, hey, you can bunt on this guy. You'll probably make it to first. And it would have probably thrown Curt Schilling off his game. But then again, who knows? Maybe not, because this is the same Curt Schilling who 3 years before had helped to dominate the Yankees in the 2001 World Series as a member of the Arizona Diamondbacks. But in any event, the game was still not over. 4-1 in the 8th inning. The Yankees have a chance to come back. And this was the second moment that you knew that gave you signs that the series was over. So Miguel Cairo hits a double. Derek Jeter drives him in. So with 1 out, that brings up A-Rod. He hits a ground ball to Bronson Arroyo, who's pitching in relief of Curt Schilling in the 8th inning. As A-Rod's running down the line to first base, he sees that Arroyo is fielding the ball. But then A-Rod does the craziest thing possible. He slaps his arm. The ball gets away. It's going down the right field line. Here comes Derek Jeter. He goes from first to home. It is now 4-3 Red Sox. The Yankees might very well come back and win this game. Until the umpires decide to get together. Do they let A-Rod get away with this? Nope. The umpires, after Terry Francona came out and persuaded them to get together, correctly ruled that A-Rod was out for interference. And as you can see in this picture, it is plain as day that they made the correct call, as painful as it is for myself to admit this. And this game made me cringe just as much as Michael Scott in this picture. Yes, it was the second out of the inning, but everybody knew that the game was pretty much over. I mean, granted, the fans were in the wrong for throwing all those bottles and debris onto the field after that happened, but still, you could sense the frustration mounting in the stadium. True, Keith Folk may have walked a few batters and put Tony Clark in a position to be the winning run at that with 2 outs, but he got out of that inning unscathed. Tony Clark struck out. Red Sox tie the series. And now, if you're a Yankee fan, you're still hoping on hope that somehow the curse will rear its ugly head and be on your side. I mean, look, you have a guy named Yogi Berra. He's become a fixture for you guys whenever things seem to go wrong. After all, wasn't it he who told you it ain't over till it's over? Not to mention there's that Bucky Dent guy. 26 years ago, he had one of the most unexpected home runs in MLB history, and the Yankees decided, let's bring him back to throw out the first pitch. So it seemed like the Yankees were trying to keep doing everything they could to keep the curse alive. As a sign once said at Yankee Stadium 3 years ago, mystique and aura appearing lightly. And most teams for many years always had felt such an aura of invincibility on the wrong end every time they played the Yankees. But unfortunately, this was the night that changed all that. And the big problem before the game, and why I think any Yankee fan knew the series was over at the beginning, Joe Torre had two options. Couldn't start Messina because he had already pitched game 5, and because of a rainout, he didn't have as much rest, so there was no shot. This time he couldn't use Messina even in relief, just as he did a year ago during the famous Aaron Boone game. Couldn't use El Duque, even though he wasn't quite as effective as he was in the late 90s, because, again, the rainout pushed the games back, and that meant that El Duque didn't have as much rest. John Lever just pitched yesterday. Obviously, he's out. So now you're stuck with a pitcher that you traded, a 39 pitcher who was once an all-star that you traded for, or another pitcher who had an all-star first half of the season, but in the second half imploded. Not good. So Kevin Brown gets the start. And it looked like he was going to get out of the woods early on. Manny Ramirez hits a single. Looks like Damon's going to score, but he gets thrown out at the plate. 2 outs. Yankees could look like they're going to be okay. But next pitch, Big Papi. That damn Big Papi. This every single time, and this would be a trend for the next 13 years. Every single time you could count on him to get a big hit against the Yankees, and he did, and he hit a 2-run home run. But the thing that this game was most memorable for, 2 innings later, Kevin Brown loads the bases. In fact, right before this at-bat that I'm going to describe, he walked Orlando Cabrera. It was an 8-pitch battle, and Joe Torre decided, you know what? I've seen enough. Let's take him out. And right there is a picture of Kevin Brown, who during the regular season had an incident where he punched a wall in the Yankee clubhouse. So, yeah, I would say that pretty much symbolizes this game. Javi Vasquez is in, and if I were Joe Torre, I don't know if I would have put Javi Vasquez in, at least not with a bases loaded situation when he wasn't starting, but throws a meatball to Johnny Damon, hits a grand slam, 6-0 after the 3rd inning. And yeah, this game was over. I mean, look, Derek Lowe pitched 6 strong innings. Only gave up 1 run on 1 hit. That was an RBI single to Derek Jeter. And sure, the Red Sox did make things interesting in the Yankees did make things interesting in the 7th, but that was only because Terry Francona did something a little too creative and decided to bring on Pedro to rub it in the Yankees' faces. So if there's one good thing about this game, it was that Pedro didn't really get his moment to gloat on the Yankees, because he gave up 2 runs on hits to 3 of the first 4 batters, including an RBI single to Kenny Lofton. So Kenny Lofton's on first, 1 out. This is probably the last legitimate threat the Yankees have at this point. And you have the first baseman coming up. Tony Clark started at first base this game. And remember, I mentioned John Olerud. He hit a home run in game 2, but then he had to be taken out early in game 3 because he hurt his foot. So he doesn't make another appearance again. But then Joe Torre decides now's the time to bring him in for a pinch hitter, despite not being at 100% and possibly on one leg. He's banking on him to have a Kirk Gibson moment. Why on earth you use him at that time instead of, say, a Ruben Sierra, I will never understand, but it happened. He struck out on a lengthy at bat. Yankees threat, even though that was a 2nd out, the Yankees threat was essentially over because Miguel Cairo would make the last out afterwards. Mark Bellhorn would put the game away not long after in the 8th inning with the solo home run. And then, yeah, the Red Sox pretty much finished off what would pretty much be considered their second impossible dream This one 37 years after the first pennant win they had, using that term, but probably even more dramatic. But the real question I have to ask as a Yankee fan is why? You had a 3-0 lead. How and why did you let this happen? Well, before I end this video, I have a long laundry list of reasons why the Yankees lost this series. First off, and it's simple, Boston had the superior starting rotation. And up until that point, that was not something that Yankee fans would be used to. Because the year before that, the Red Sox had Pedro, but then had a few other pitchers, such as Tim Wakefield, weren't quite as good. This time, you add Curt Schilling to that rotation. And Curt Schilling, along with Pedro at the top, makes for pretty much a deadly 1-2 punch. And then you have Derek Lowe pitching as well as he did. Derek Lowe actually was left off the starting rotation, but he found a way to make his way back for the ALCS, and he redeemed himself in a big way. And I'll go into more detail explaining why the Yankees pitching rotation was so bad. Not to mention Boston's bullpen outpitched the Yankees, especially when it was needed the most. Another big reason the Yankees didn't win. Remember, I mentioned there were certain opportunities the Yankees had to put away the Red Sox with runners in scoring position. They went a combined 8 for 40. You look at the last 4 games, especially, and this is all in the last 4 games. And if there's 2 culprits in particular that I really have to identify, it's 2 of the big names they had gotten during the offseason. A-Rod, the biggest one. He went 1 for 12, did not drive in a single run in the last 3 games. And he started off pretty well. He went 7 for 19, 5 RBIs, couple home runs. And then Gary Sheffield, another guy who started off well. He was tearing the cover off the ball. He goes 1 for 17 in the last 4. So if your main source of power in the lineup isn't hitting, that can be a problem. And it's not, and I'll tell you, it's not the last time that's happened with the Yankees living or dying by the lawn ball. Together, those 2 had 14 strikeouts. So if I'm going to really elaborate on why the Yankees lost, it's also worth mentioning that the 2001 World Series was essentially the end of the Yankees dynasty. I mean, they had those crazy wins in games 4 and 5. Almost won in game 7, but then you had Mariano blowing the save that day. A lot of the teams started to go after that. Paul O'Neill retired. Scott Brocious retired. Chuck Knobloch left as a free agent. So essentially, most of the old guard was starting to go. 2003, you still had maybe a good fraction of what was remaining from the dynasty of the late 90s. But then, after you lost that World Series to the Florida Marlins, more changes. I mentioned that the starting pitching from the Red Sox was better. Now, why was the Yankees so weak? Well, let's put it this way. 2003, you had a starting rotation that featured the likes of Mike Mussina, Roger Clemens, Andy Pettit, and David Wells. Not to mention, you also had prized free agent international signing Jose Contreras, and you also had Jeff Weaver, who ended up costing the Yankees in the World Series. 3 of these pitchers, that I mentioned, had won World Series rings with the Yankees. And 3 of them were also left-handed. Had the Yankees kept at least one of them, there's a chance they could have neutralized that really powerful Boston Red Sox lineup. But one of the problems in that offseason, let's look at how the rotation looked in 2004. You still have Mike Mussina, maybe not quite as good. You no longer have Roger Clemens. We thought he was going to retire. Instead, he goes to Houston. It is what it is. The real issue, David Wells also left. He ended up going to San Diego. David Wells had personal issues with George Steinbrenner. I'm not really going to get into that. Then you have the case of Andy Pettit. He was a free agent after the 2003 World Series. Now, granted, He lost the last game of that World Series, but he only gave up 2 runs. He can't really hold that against them. For the most part, he was a great big game pitcher, and he had a really big winning percentage. Despite all that, though, he didn't have the personality that George Steinbrenner really liked. And I think George often really underestimated how good of a pitcher and how good of a warrior he really was. And he really didn't lift a finger on signing Andy Pettit until the Astros made their offer. And by the time he tried to match it, it was too late. He was joining Roger Clemens in Houston. And to say that those two were a big loss was a major, major understatement. And in contrast to 2004, you have those 3 guys gone. Now you get back El Duque, but he's not the same dominant. Well, he's not the same effective pitcher that he was in the late 90s. You now have Kevin Brown, who, as I mentioned, was a really good, was an all-star pitcher in the late 90s. Probably one of the best, had one of the best stretches that isn't really talked about. Wins a pennant with San Diego, has good years with the Dodgers. Then he goes to the Yankees, and he proves to not be suitable with New York. He emotionally was a mess, and pitching-wise, he was an absolute disaster. John Lieber is in that rotation too. He's okay, but he's not quite memorable. So all in all, this rotation was a massive downgrade. And not to mention the average age of the starting pitchers were mid-30s. So right then and there, that's why the Red Sox had the superior starting rotation. But the real thing about the Yankees in 2004 was that by now, I mentioned that after 2001, the team really started to slowly change. By now, when you look at the championship Yankees, the only ones that really knew what it was like to win a World Series in the Bronx at that point in time, Andy Pettit, remember, would return later. Mariano Rivera, Derek Jeter, Bernie Williams, and Jorge Posada. And because El Duque was for a second tour, I'm not going to count him. So it was just those 4. Because you look at everyone else in the lineup, I didn't mention Jason Giambi. John Olerud started at first base because Jason Giambi was out due to a series of illnesses and injuries. Jason Giambi was a free agent. Hideki Matsui was an international free agent signing. A-Rod was a big trade. Gary Sheffield was a free agent. So essentially, as Mike Francesa said in the post-mortem series recapping 2004, the Yankees weren't necessarily a group of guys who were grinders and doing whatever it takes to win. They were a collection of talent. And a lot of them just weren't, a lot of the players just weren't quite suited to play in New York. Some did well, some failed. And a lot of that was the case with the 2004 Yankees. And a lot of them weren't necessarily around for too much longer afterwards. And not to mention, this was the first series loss where Joe Torre was badly outmanaged. So, in other words, basically, the Yankees' philosophy changed where they stopped relying, where after the farm system had gone dry, they relied on stars and big names. And this is why I always say that the 2001 World Series loss led to the disaster of 2004, because everything changed. And it had gotten to the point where it led to an embarrassing loss. So Joe Torre was badly outmatched. And looking back, I also think this series may have slowly been the beginning of the end of Joe Torre, because for many years, he was able to win so many postseason rounds. But by the time he suffered that loss to the Red Sox, I don't know if he ever fully regained the trust of George Steinbrenner afterwards. And every baseball fan, every Yankee fan knows how George Steinbrenner ran his teams. And now you know why the Yankees lost the 2004 World Series. It was one of the most heartbreaking and gut-wrenching defeats in this franchise's history. And sadly, it was one of the first Yankees moments that I remembered. My first memory of the Yankees was Aaron Boone's home run. This was one of the first full seasons, and yeah, it stunk. And I feel sick to my stomach that I spent such a long time spending this punishment, even telling you the story. But you know what? This is what happens when you finish last in quick picks. This is what happens when you make some bad football predictions. And I think I've learned my lesson. I promise I will not finish last in quick picks, and I will not have to do a video retelling the story of a bad loss of one of my teams. However, I'm not done yet. There will be another video to come shortly thereafter, this time of a football memory that haunts me for the rest of my days. But until next time, I'm Hank Addictor. You have watched part 1 of my punishment.